AM.
1060 AM, WNOE is the exclusive New Orleans home for the Larry King Show.
This is BBC Radio 1, 990 AM, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg.
OOL-FM HD1, Phoenix.
Here in Cayman, there's so much pride in the roots, heritage, and history of our island.
Giving Jamaica a better music mix. This is Power 106.
Well, the radio station WNG 601. Broadcasting on a frequency of 162.425 megahertz from Rio Grande City.
We got him! We got him, baby!
That the police were looking and following some...
Yeah!
You survived the static.
You pushed through the noise floor.
Now it's time to hear what's on the other side.
Welcome to the ultimate celebration of the chase.
Broadcasting from North Shore Studios in Mandeville, Louisiana.
This is the From the Static podcast from DX Central.
We take you now to Studio A and your host, Lloyd Van Horn.
Welcome to the DX Central From the Static podcast. I am your host, Lloyd Van Horn, here in Studio A in the North Shore Studios in Mandeville, Louisiana, where we're talking Sporadic E, my friends. It's E-Skip season, and this is episode 32 of the podcast, and our second now in this series of looking at the data from our current Sporadic E season. It's the 2026 season here in North America, and I don't think I need to make this a big suspenseful thing. It's been one hell of a year, hasn't it? I mean, there always will be people who are on the cusp. People who are like, I didn't really get anything at all. Well, there's always going to be those folks who, for whatever reason, didn't get any E-Skip when everyone else around them was getting tons. But I think even the folks that didn't get as much as they wanted to, or a whole lot of it, can probably tell by looking on social media, the W-Logger or FM list. You can tell by looking at what's coming in that this has been a special season, right? It's been really, really strong. So we're going to talk about the numbers. We're going to dive into the data and see what the data is telling us. We're going to also maybe talk about a little bit, what do we think might be driving this kind of spike in activity? There's some things out there that might be behind that. So we'll talk about some theories that are out there around those. And then we'll also take a look at, when we dive into the numbers, we'll be looking back at historical data for the month of June, and then looking at this year and seeing how it compares. And then we're also going to take a look at these kind of first 7 days of July or so, and also kind of what might be on the horizon here, what we might have. Now, I know last month when I did this episode 31, where we looked back at May, I did that recording on June 5th. And between the time that I recorded that episode and put the podcast out, all hell broke loose. It absolutely went nuts. So who knows what's going to happen after I put this one to bed? Between the time that I'm sitting here recording this right now and when you're listening to it, who knows what's going to happen? But we'll try to put our thinking cap on and see, what does historically the first 7 days kind of look like for July, and how does that usually kind of pan out? And then we'll see how's that stack up with what we have so far. So, before we get any further, though, a quick reminder recap for those who might be newer to the podcast in this kind of subject we're talking about. You're going to hear me talk a lot about our data set. And our data set is, you can find all of it on fmdxdata.com. That is our website for our Sporadic E data analysis project. Again, that's fmdxdata.com. From there, you're looking at basically logs that have been submitted by DXers from North America to fmlist.org. We take that data and then we put it through our data engine and do a bunch of number crunching, and we put some visuals with it and all kinds of stuff. And that's what you can find up at fmdxdata.com. Now, that is for 2017 through 2025. 2017 is the beginning of the data set that we have available, and the last season that we put in the numbers for into that engine is 2025. I'm running current year separately through a second engine that I have, which is pretty much the same thing, but I'm not pulling it into the larger website engine yet because people are still reviewing logs. recordings. I'm still on 521. I'm still on the May 21st opening, and it's July 8th. I think I've got somewhere on the order of about 20 hours worth of full band IQ recordings to go through. It's going to take a minute. So I say that to say, if you are one of those folks listening to this going, oh, I haven't put my logs in the FM list yet, you got time. You got time. I go back in and I refresh the data. I pull in, I basically clear out what I have and then pull in the fresh data on a regular basis so that I'm looking at the most recent information. Now I say that, but I'm sitting on about 900 logs through the 7th of July that I haven't pulled in yet. So I'm a little behind on that. But yeah, we're going to take a look at this data here. I'm taking the data I'm gathering in real time, current year, and comparing that to the historic data. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So before we go into the actual historical data from June, let's just take a very high level glance at the 2026 season so far. Just a very high level executive summary of the numbers, just to kind of see what we've seen so far. So 19 active days in the month of May. I'm sorry, 18 active days in the month of May, 30 active days in the month of June. So every day in June brought us activity, and we have every one of the first 7 days, actually 8 days here in July, has also had activity. So we're sitting at about, what is that, 18 is 48, 56 days so far. And there's only 12 days, 12 days, roughly 13 days that we haven't had any activity. And those were all in May. So pretty productive year as far as like consistently putting out Sporadic E. The numbers, though, really are the telling story here and what makes this such a historic year. It's not just that we've had activity every day because, you know, even in 2024, when we look at the number of active days in 2024, it was still pretty good that there was some activity. It just wasn't a lot. We had 29 active days in the month of June in 2024. We had in July a little bit less because July, especially towards the later part of the month, it started kind of getting a little wonky. 24 days in July of 2024 that had activity. I think May, though, that year, if I remember right, May, we had 19 active days in May of 2024. So actually more than this year. So that's one of the metrics that we look at as the number of active days. So how often is it producing activity? Another one of the metrics we look at is just log count, pure log count. Now, I don't use this as my solitary gauge of season quality. In fact, I don't really get into season quality all that much. Of this season's better than that season and this season better than that season because there are too many variables. We have SDRs now. More people are using SDRs and auto loggers and different pieces of technology, and they can look at different maps that we didn't have before so they can see the openings better and get alerts about openings. People are on social media and chat channels and talking about stuff. So it's just easier now than it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago even to know when there's an opening, where is it coming from, where should I point my antenna, all that kind of stuff. It's just easier now. And even if you aren't DXing actively, your autologger can be for you. In fact, today's massive opening, I spent most of the day doing my day job stuff. I wasn't DXing. I was doing my day job. So I couldn't sit there and do a whole lot of live DX. In fact, I did very, very little. But my autologgers absolutely caught just a ton of stuff, right? And my recordings that I had running were catching all of it while I was working. Other days where I'm doing live DX, you know, I'm sitting there pulling in close to 70, 80 logs for the day live DX and then go back in and squeeze out the rest on recordings. I can do that now, but 10 years ago, that wasn't really as much of a thing. So when we look at the numbers, just the raw numbers, I don't try to stack up and say, typically this year was better than that because it had more logs, or this year was worse because it had fewer. I don't really try to do that. I mean, there are some instances where you can't really get around it. Like 2024 was awful, and there were like 6,000 logs for the year. We did that in one day this year. Okay, so I don't like to do those kind of comparisons, but sometimes that context helps. So I present the data as a way to provide that context, right? That's what we're doing here when I'm talking about log counts. Because I can sit here with you and poke holes in every data point that I present to you here in this podcast. I can poke holes in every single one of them. So I'm not sitting here from a scientific standpoint saying this is a good season, this is a bad season, this was better than that season or anything like that. We're just providing context, okay? And in the course of that, sometimes I'll make a statement like 2024 was awful. 2025 was pretty good if you're looking at output. Now, was it a great season? I mean, it was one of my better seasons, but I think there was definitely some things where it was lacking. This year, I think by and large, we're all in agreement this is a good season. I know there's people I see on social media who complain, I haven't had any DX in weeks, while the rest of us are just swimming in it. And sometimes it's people who are in locations where I know there's DX happening. So sometimes that can happen. You might have some kind of factor. Your setup might be causing you some troubles because of noise or interference. Maybe you weren't looking at the moment that the DX was happening. Maybe your local band has stations on frequencies where those frequencies are where the opening was coming in from, right? Because the location where the DX was coming from, their DX was on those same frequencies where you have stations. So you just didn't see anything. It could be any number of different factors. But I think by and large, again, if you're objective about this, even if you personally haven't had a great season, you can look at the overall picture here and see what's happening on social media, on WLogger, on FM List. You can see all the different things people are reporting and say, man, it's been a pretty good year. Now, I haven't had a great year, but it's been a pretty good year. You can probably say that, right? So right now we're sitting at, and this is through the end of July 7th, we're sitting at a little bit more than 27,000 logs reported for this season. 27,000. That is way more than anything we've ever had in our data set. Last year was our record breaker at 23,239 logs. And I thought that was spectacular. I was like, wow, I really did not expect us to meet or exceed that this year. I really didn't. But here we are. It's 2026, and we're just now in the first week of June, or July rather, and we're 4,000 or more above that number. And by the way, this is not inclusive of today's activity from today, July 8th, where I know we're going to cross 2,000 logs for today. We're over 1,500 already. We're going to cross 2,000, I would say. Or if not, it's going to be really, really close. Okay? Really close to 2,000. So 1,800, 1,900, we're splitting hairs. Right? So north of 6,000 more logs this year so far, with the rest of July and all of August to go, than our peak year, which was last year. The previous peak year was 2022, and that was 17,685 logs. And again, you can follow along with us on fmdxdata.com for the historical stuff these previous years. I haven't put in 2026 yet, but the rest of those years through 2025 will be there. So way like 10,000, 12,000 more than our previous top year. June by itself almost was in excess of the season total of last year. Let me say that again. June of this year by itself almost exceeded all of last year's logs. And last year broke the record. This year, June by itself just about eclipsed that. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. I mean, what do you do with that? 1 month turning into a whole season's worth of activity. May, we had more this year in May than we've ever had in any other May. We had over 3,500 this year in May. Well, the previous top dog in that regard was 2023 with 2,400 logs, and that's because that one day that year we had 1,600. Otherwise, that was like an 800 log event that year or month. So those are some of the numbers we're looking at here. June was incredible. May was actually really, really good as well. And July is already shaping up to be a very, very good month. We're closing in on 5,000 logs for the month of July so far, which is really, really good. That's in 1 week, and our highest July ever, which was our highest month until this year, our highest July ever was around 10,000 logs. So in the first week, we're halfway to our highest July ever. And we still have the rest of the month left to go. So when I talk about from a log standpoint, that's what I'm saying when I say I don't try to do the comparisons, but there are some times when the context is so important that you have to say, now we've never seen this before, at least not in our data. Because all the data we had really before was like Pat Dyer's amazing data that he was collecting there in San Antonio, but that was just his data from San Antonio. You know, it was anecdotal. It was me talking about my season from here in Mandeville or when I was living in Charleston, or so-and-so talking about their season from Ohio or whatever it might be, right? It's always been very isolated down to what did I have at my location? Well, what if you're in a spot that gets more E's than everybody else, like Randy? Or what if you're in a spot that doesn't get as much E, like Southern California and Arizona? Well, that season may look terrible for you. And so there are years where the year is fantastic, but there are certain locations that just don't see a lot. Like our friends down in the desert of Southern California, parts of Arizona, they're probably listening to this podcast and thinking to themselves, yeah, right. I wish I was getting all that. And that's okay. Right? That's why I said before, there will be people who listen to the analysis and say, well, I didn't think it was a great year. But there will always be that. There will always be somebody left out. 2022, everyone raved about 2022. It was a terrible year for me. I didn't get hardly anything that year. A couple openings here and there. Not anything to write home about. But it was our best year in our data set until last year. So, those are some of the high-level numbers here. Just, it's been an incredible year. We're going to dive into these more in detail to really provide the real context here, because that's where I think once you get into the minutia of it, that's where you'll see the real context. But overall, just know, from a high level, we've never had in our data set a season like this before. Ever. So if I'm trying to provide context, it's an unprecedented context. It's just the only context I can provide to you is how far above every other season this year is. That's the only context I have to offer. Anecdotally, I can tell you this season feels like 2003, which was the best season I ever saw. And that was the year where I would come home every day, and there was, from North Carolina where I was living, there was Minnesota, there was Wisconsin, there was the Dakotas, there was, Florida, wherever it was. Every single day I would come home from work and I felt like there was DX every day. That's what this year has felt like. Somebody's getting something decent every single day, especially so far in July and for a stretch there in June. Every day was really good. Okay, so that's our high-level overview. For our next, we're going to take a quick break here. For our next segment, we're going to dive into the historical data of June. What does June look like in years past? We're going to look at some key metrics and kind of set the stage for June as a whole. And then we'll take a quick break after that, and we'll come back and we'll do current year. What does June of 2026 look like? And then we'll also be setting the stage later on the first week of July. What does that look like in compared to some of the context? What does it tell us about what we can maybe expect for the rest of the season? I'm not a mind reader. I'm not a prognosticator or a fortune teller. I can't do that. There's no way of predicting this stuff, but maybe we can at least glean something from the tea leaves a bit. So that's what we'll be doing here. So don't go anywhere, my friends. More of the DX Central from the Static Podcast is heading your way right after this.
From the Static is made possible by listeners just like you. If you love tracking the bands and sharing the thrill of the chase, consider joining the crew in Studio C on Patreon. Your support is what keeps the dials spinning and the content coming. As a thank you, our patrons get exclusive perks, including early access to every single podcast episode, a full week of early access to all DX Central YouTube videos, exclusive patron-only live streams, and the first look at upcoming challenges and contests. Help us keep the Static alive. Become a member today at patreon.com/DXCentral. That's patreon.com/DXCentral.
Ever wonder what the bands sound like down on the Gulf Coast? You don't have to wonder anymore. Head over to livedxing.com and spin the dials right from our North Shore studios. For AM, shortwave, and ham radio enthusiasts, we have a dedicated lineup of Kiwi SDRs ready to pull in weak signals. If you're an FM DXer, dive into our suite of 5 high-performance FM web servers, each paired with a top-tier antenna built specifically to catch legendary Gulf tropo openings, and hopefully some sporadic E. Plus, our VHF and tracking setups let you monitor local air traffic from MSY, pull in NOAA weather radio, and decode live APRS, ADSB, and marine AIS data right on the map. If you want to explore further, we've got links to global receiver directories to take your DXing worldwide. Experience the airwaves from our neck of the woods. For the DXer or radio enthusiast who wants to hear it all, visit livedxing.com today.
The summer heat is officially here, and that means the dials are catching fire. The 3rd annual DX Central Summer of DX Challenge is underway right now. This year, we've turned up the temperature. For the first time ever, we've added NOAA weather radio to the lineup. Get ready to hunt down those elusive, low-power weather radio stations via tropo, meteor scatter, or major sporadic E openings. We've completely overhauled the medium wave and FM interfaces with a brand new log entry process featuring full bulk import options to save you time. And the hunt goes deeper than ever. Alongside our classic grid square chase, we've added a brand new county chase and targeted bounty hunts to push your gear to the limit. Are you ready to claim your spot on the leaderboard? Head to summerofdx.com and log your catches today.
Summer of DX.
You're listening to the From the Static podcast from DX Central. Let's take you back to the North Shore studios and your host, Lloyd Van Horn.
We are talking Sporadic E here on the DX Central From the Static podcast, and this is our kind of midpoint of the season recap of Sporadic E, and for this North American season here in 2026. And we've gotten through May, we've gotten through June, and a little bit of July, and so we're kind of taking a little bit of a pause here to look back on the month of June and what we've seen so far in July, and kind of assess where we're at. And as we kind of talked about in the last segment, this has been quite the season. It's been historic. It's been unprecedented in many ways. So I want to make sure we kind of talk a bit about that. But before we can really kind of say that, we have to look at the historical guidance, the data that's there from our data set at fmdxdata.com, and take a look at that data that's there and see what the historical data tells us for the month of June. And that way we can at least put into context the numbers we're going to look at here in the next segment when we look at current year. So again, this is from our website, fmdxdata.com, from our Sporadic E data analysis project, where we are taking user-submitted logs, DXers who have submitted logs to fmlist.org, and we're taking the North American ones, and we are compiling those all together, and we're analyzing. We're seeing what does the data tell us based off of those logs, and what kind of trends can we kind of assess and things like that. So June is historically a big month for Sporadic E, as you kind of expect, right? It's especially towards the end of the month, you're getting really into the peak, and you're getting into the real meat of the season. It's the whole month is usually pretty good overall, but the meat of the season's really kind of there towards the middle to latter half of the month is where you see the majority of your Sporadic E for the year. And historically, that's kind of been the case, right? It's typically been kind of this bell curve distribution to an extent, with a little bit of a lean towards the latter half of the month. Historic years before last year was our biggest June ever. When I say last year, I mean 2025. 2025 was our biggest June ever with 9,859 logs. We're going to look at that from a DXer perspective, logs per DXer and things like that when we get into it here in a second, because there will always be kind of like the however. And I do want to make sure we don't diminish the however here, because yes, we are in an era now where we have SDRs, some that allow us to do full band recordings so we can get more logs than we ever have before, right? Yes, we live in an era with auto loggers, both rabbit ears and like SDR console receivers that kind of sit in log RDS. We have FM list E alerts, and we have all these other resources that we can use to go out there and not only see when E is happening, but really squeeze the most out of every opening that we can. So to that end, every year that we go into this, we're getting more and more advanced. We have these online web servers now where you can DX from, around the world. And so even if you're not, I have five different web servers up here in Mandeville. And even if I'm not DXing, or sometimes when I am on my home gear, I have people who are DXing from my web servers and submitting logs to FM list on my behalf from my gear, right? So there's that element as well. So there's really more coverage to these events than we've ever had. There's more knowledge, there's more information, there's more data. So yes, because of that, we should see an uptick in the amount of logging that we have. But how much of that uptick is because of that, because of the improved technology and the improved access to information, and how much of that uptick is because of the season? So we try to take a look at these previous years, especially like the last, since 2021-ish, 2022-ish, when some of these auto loggers and things like that really started coming online. We try to compare what we have now to those seasons and see how that kind of measures out. So last year, 2025 was our biggest year that we had ever seen in the month of June, for Sporadic E, 9,859 logs. Before that, our biggest was 2022. Okay. So it's not this gradual linear rise every year we get more than we had the year before. There are some valleys and peaks, as you would kind of expect, because that's how a typical kind of seasonality is going to play into this, right? So 2022, 8,844 logs submitted. And right below that was 2023 was 7,310. The worst June that we've had, at least what I'll call this kind of modern era, this like SDR era, was 2024 with 2,763 logs. Can you imagine that? We had multiple days this year with that much or more as a single day in the month of June. And that was our entire June total for the entire month in 2024. It's crazy. Another metric I like to look at is the number of active days. So last year we had 29 active days in June. So we had that huge output, and we didn't even have DX every day. We had 29 days in June of 2024. So the same number of days produced 2,700 logs in 2024 and 9,800 logs in 2025. So that's, fairly even as far as what you would expect from both years had equal access to rabbit ears, both years had equal access to FM list and SDRs and all those other things. So the difference was the seasonality. The difference was in the quality of the year. Right? 30 days in 2023 and 2022. Only 28 days of activity in 2021. And that year we had 4,662 logs submitted in 2021. Kind of a down year in the month of June in 2021, which is crazy considering what happened in July of that year. July exploded. And so there was this thing that I was seeing in some of the earlier data sets where if you had a really big June, you would have kind of a smaller July. If you had a really big July, that means you probably had a smaller June. And that bared out for most of the data that we're looking at here from the previous years. Last year kind of wiped that out to an extent. Last year we had a bigger June than we did July, for sure. But it wasn't that much of a difference. It wasn't like drastic difference like we see in some of these other years. Some other things to kind of note for June of previous years, the number of days over 100 logs. So this is one of the things that I like to look at. It's not so much just the pure log count. It's how many, or just even the active days. It's how many days we're producing bigger openings, right? How many days in that month produced larger openings that were more productive, that had more DXers involved in them? That can be a gauge of season quality as well. So let's look at that. So days over 100 logs. 2022 was our biggest year, but it only had 14 days of over 100 logs. So there were a lot of days out of that. Remember, we had 30 days in 2022 where there was activity, right? But 14 of those had over 100 logs. So that means we had 16 days, more than half of the month was under 100 logs. This is one of the things that I think a lot of people forget about, because 2022 is one of those years that people talk about. Oh, it was a great year. June 2022 was a great year. But we had more than half of the month was under 100 logs per day. Right? So that's one of the things that I think a lot of people forget about when we're looking at quality. They think about these really big days, but it's a lot of times it's a consistency of the openings, the consistency of the output. And most years, you have some days of like 200-300 logs on a day or whatever, but those are kind of saddled right around, either right before or right after a bigger opening usually. And then in between those, you have kind of a smaller output. You have these little periods of inactivity or low activity that will occur in between these like spurts of bigger stuff where you have kind of a ramp up, ramp down on either side of that. We talked about that before here on the podcast. So to see 16 days out of the month produce less than 100 logs per day, and that was our biggest June we've ever had, tells you there were some pretty big openings in that month that were driving that. And we did. We had one day, 3 days over 1,000 logs that year in June of 2022. We had 7 days that were producing more than 500 logs. Okay, 7 days that produced more than 500 logs in a day. So that is, of the 14 days that we had that produced more than 100 logs, half of those were more than 500. And almost half of those were over 1,000. So you'll see here, what I'm trying to get at here with this is 2022, there was a lot of in between some explosive days. But people talk about 2022 in hushed tones like, oh, that was a great year. Right? Then we look at a year like 2023. 2023, we had 17 days of over 100 logs per day, our highest in the data set. No other year had more days of over 100 logs in between 2017 and 2025 than 2023 did. 17 days of over 100 logs. Only 2 of those produced over 500. One of those was our big explosive day on June 11th of 2023, where we had 2,600 logs. And then we had another one that was 851 logs on the 22nd of that year. Every other day was below 500. And it fell just behind 2022 in the log count, 7,300 logs. Most of that was being driven by June 11th. So 2023, a lot of people were like, it wasn't a great year. You had more days of 100 or more logs, but you had fewer explosive days. Okay? So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to understand when people on social media, when people in like the Slack channel, when people are out here in the DX community talking about this year was great, this year was not great, I know that typically that's through the lens of their own experience. I know that that usually means either they are getting DX or they're not getting DX on a regular basis. But I'm trying to kind of equate that to an overall high-level view of the season, and the best that I can come up with is that we need to have a season where you had a lot of days of activity, okay, that had higher outputs. The higher outputs means that more DXers are getting into it. When you're seeing those days of 500 logs or more, those are days where there's a pretty good number of DXers who are getting into that. It's not like 3 DXers each getting 200 some odd logs each or something. It's not like that, right? If they're getting that many logs per DXer, there's a big opening going on, right? A smaller opening is not going to be able to sustain itself or be robust enough to give just a couple of people that many logs. So if you're seeing 500, 600, 700, 800 logs in a day, in North America, that's pretty good. Now, in Europe, that's terrible. That's like an awful day for them. But in North America, that's a good day. That's kind of the meat and potatoes of what we think of when we think of a good e-skip season, is that we need a lot of those. Okay? So 2022 had 7 days of over 500 logs in the month of June, only 2 in 2023. Everyone thinks 2023 was not great for the most part. 2022 was great. There's your difference. That's the only difference because they had fewer days of 100 or more logs in 22 than 23. But it was more of the 500. So that's got to be it because that means, again, more people were getting involved in those logs, in those events, rather. We all agree 2024 was terrible. There were only 7 days over 100 logs in the month of June of 2024, and one of those produced 500 or more, and it was 688. So there was nothing over 1,000, nothing to even sink your teeth into. At least 2023 had that one 2,600 log day where people were like, hey, we had that one, right? But the rest of the month was kind of but we had that one. 2024 didn't even have that. 2024 was just awful. But interestingly enough, when we go back, now we're going back to the personal experience, while the season was not good, and while there were not a lot of really good openings, the pathways that I had that year, I have not had since. I had a lot more western paths out to Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, down into Mexico, things like that. I had more of those in 2024 than I did last year in 2025 or this year in 2026. This year, the log counts went through the roof because I had more eastern U.S. stuff where there's more stations. So it's interesting. You might not have as many logs. The openings might not be as good, but you're going to get some stuff you might not get otherwise. That's interesting to me. Okay. So then we get to last year, 2025. And this is kind of a setup for what was going to kind of propel us into the current year, 2026. 9,859 logs last year in 2025, our biggest June ever. 29 active days. Average logs per day was 340 logs per day. That was the average. Now, 2024 had an average of 95. 2023 had an average of 244. And 2022 had an average of 295. So that was that biggest year we had before last year was 295 logs per day. And that's what I'm saying. When you look at, I think you need to have an average of above 250 logs per day, 250 to 300 logs per day or more for people to look at the month and say, that was pretty good. 2025 at 340. 16 days, so more than half of the month, was over 100 logs per day. And 4 of those 16 were over 500. And of those 4 of them, all 4 were over 1,000. We had 1,854 on the 26th. We had 1,297 on the 17th. We had 1,227 on the 14th, and we had on June 3rd 1,637 in 2025. So 4 days over 500, and all 4 of those actually were over 1,000. And that's what really pushed our totals. We had some big days. In between those, you had kind of this ramp up, ramp down thing a little bit, with the exception of there was this little period here from June, we'll call it 12th, through the, trying to see my lineup here, 16th. The 12th through the 16th, listen to these log totals. 363, 106, 1227, 235, 272, 1297. And then it kind of fell down a little bit from there. But that was a period there where you had some elevated log totals. Now, they were all above 100, with only the 2 that were over 1,000 being over 500. So they weren't like super robust in between the big spurts. But there was some activity that people were getting into. But here's the thing. We're over our 250, 300 logs per day threshold that I talked about. We had a decent number of days over 500. It wasn't as many as 2022, but there were 4 that were over 500, and they all produced over 1,000. So, and the log counts were high, but a lot of people kind of were on June of 2025. So we hit a lot of the things we talk about where we think, okay, these are what makes a good season. This is what makes a good month. But people were still very kind of mellow on June of 2025 overall, even with the highest June log count we'd ever seen, a super high count of 100 or more logs per day, and a decently high count of the 500 or more. So as I'm trying to understand, as I'm trying to get my head around this kind of numeric data and the anecdotal storytelling of the season, now I have to rethink. I mean, the only thing I can really kind of point to here was that, yes, our number of 500 or more was up, but it was still fewer than 2022, and we didn't have any of those like medium openings. I'm talking 500 to 1,000. We didn't have any of those last year in June. Between 500 and 1,000, where you have enough people kind of getting in on it to kind of make it kind of worthwhile. Right? So I'm trying to kind of figure out here, what are people kind of thinking about when they're thinking about these months? And that's the best I can come up with, is we want some explosive big days. 2025 had that. It had 4 of those days. Check, 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 and check. We need consistency in output. We had 16 days over 100 logs. Check. That's good. And we need some of those openings in between the big ones and kind of like the smaller ones, with these kind of intermediary openings that more people are getting involved in and kind of make you and kind of carry you over. Right? Maybe you have to go back to your recording and review those after the fact. Maybe you don't. But it's a good opening, and it kind of satiates. It's like a little snack in between the big meals. And 2025 didn't have a lot of that. 2025 didn't have a lot of snacks. It had big meals. It had really big meals. 2022 had a lot more snacks than it did big meals. It had 3 big meals in 2022? Which I think is probably enough for most people. 3 big meals a day, right? I mean, seriously, it had 3 days over 1,000, and then 4 days of over 500, but under 1,000. So those are your snacks. We had some bigger meals. People love 2022. 2025, no snacks, big meals. People were kind of Because I remember what I felt like. It felt like I was waiting a long period of time between, I'm getting an opening, this is exciting, and the next one. That's how I felt. I felt like I was waiting a long period of time between openings before I even saw any activity, really. There was a long gap between periods of activity. So that's how 2025 felt for me. I thought it was good from an overall standpoint because what was good was great. I got some really good openings in 2025. So when it was good, it was good. But when it wasn't good, it wasn't hardly anything at all. Where the other seasons, like 2022, when it wasn't at its highest, it was still pretty good. So I think that's what I'm kind of landing on here. Is the key to a good season or an anecdotally viewed good season, it's not as much about the big openings, although you need those. Point back to 2023. Or even 2021. Let's look at 2021 as an example. 8 days of over 100 logs in 2021. Half of those were over 500. Right? Now, none of those crossed the 1,000 log barrier. When we talk about 2021, no one ever talks about June. It's always July because June was not good. Because we didn't have the big meals. We had a handful of snacks. And we had a whole lot of nothing in between. All right? So I think it's a balanced approach. That's, I think, the key. It's a balanced approach of the number of really big openings, those 500 to 1,000 intermediary openings, and then those 100 to 500 openings in between, they're kind of on the low end. They kind of like, you look at, you're like, wow, somebody's getting some action. And the more of those that you see, and the more of the 500 to 1,000 you see, which has more stuff on the map, the more of all that you're seeing, you're thinking, wow, that's been a pretty good year. I mean, I'm not getting a ton, but somebody's getting some stuff. Right? I think that's the key. So I go through this exercise because when we look at 2026, you're going to see exactly why I'm going through this exercise. You're going to be able to count it along with me because it's pretty remarkable. Let's look at some other really quick metrics about these previous seasons. So I talked about unique DXers. 119 unique DXers in 2025. That was our highest for one season. Our previous high had been in 2023 with 105, 2022 with 99, 2021 with 84, and 2024 with 84. So there was kind of this linear progression, this linear upward movement of more DXers each year than the previous year until we got to 2024. That tells you how bad that season was. It was so bad. There were so few openings, so few people getting in on the openings that it actually dropped in a period where we were seeing linear year-over-year growth every year on the number of people submitting logs. 2024 saw a drop. So 119 is our current record to beat. That was in 2025. And then our logs per DXer actually peaked in 2021. How about that? So this is another little metric I like to look at. Logs per DXer. So this says on any given month, day, year, whatever you're looking at it, what's the number of logs that each DXer is getting? Because the higher that number is, the more you got to think the DXer is happy. The higher the logs per DXer count is, the happier the DXer is. So just because you're adding more DXers into each year, what's your log per DXer count? Well, 2021 is our highest at 208 logs per DXer. 2024 was our bottomed out lowest at 71. Last year, 2025, 195. So 195 compared to 208 in 2021. 2022 was only 178. So 2022 was actually as good of a year as it was, as many logs as we had. It was a down year in the number of logs per DXer. So where do we land in 2026? Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to show you how 2026 blew every single thing that we just talked about right out of the water.
From the Static is made possible by listeners just like you. If you love tracking the bands and sharing the thrill of the chase, consider joining the crew in Studio C on Patreon. Your support is what keeps the dials spinning and the content coming. As a thank you, our patrons get exclusive perks, including early access to every single podcast episode, a full week of early access to all DX Central YouTube videos, exclusive patron-only live streams, and the first look at upcoming challenges and contests. Help us keep the Static alive. Become a member today at patreon.com/DXCentral. That's patreon.com/DXCentral.
The summer heat is officially here, and that means the dials are catching fire. The third annual DX Central Summer of DX Challenge is underway right now. This year, we've turned up the temperature. For the first time ever, we've added NOAA weather radio to the lineup. Get ready to hunt down those elusive low-power weather radio stations via Tropo, Meteor Scatter, or major Sporadic E openings. We've completely overhauled the medium wave and FM interfaces with a brand new log entry process, featuring full bulk import options to save you time. And the hunt goes deeper than ever. Alongside our classic grid square chase, we've added a brand new county chase and targeted bounty hunts to push your gear to the limit. Are you ready to claim your spot on the leaderboard? Head to summerofdx.com and log your catches today.
Summer of DX.
Hey DXers, do you need a break from the same old static? Well, then you need to tune in to DX Radio, where we're spinning the best custom DX-themed music on the web.
What are you doing?
What's up?
Please, step away from the microphone.
I mean, I'm just cutting the DX Radio promo.
You hired me to be the station voice. So why are you doing the station voice?
Well, I mean, to be fair, DX Radio is a DX Central venture. It's my project. Plus, do I need to remind you, I actually do have some radio experience. I was on air, I did sports, I was a news director.
Ah, yes. Who can forget your tenure in the massive market of the mountains of North Carolina? We're all still deeply moved by the legacy of Uncle Lloyd's Bluegrass Hoedown Jamboree. Not to mention those years doing, college, radio.
Okay, first of all, it wasn't so much a hoedown as it was a jamboree. And second, I know my way around a promo read.
Lloyd, you pay me to read the promos. Let me do the job you hired me to do. I don't walk into your office and interfere with your spreadsheets or fuddle about with the antenna feed lines. If you feel the need to manage someone, maybe go stop Gary from trying to use the vibration of the studio monitors to mix the ingredients in his morning bowl of oatmeal.
I'm just trying to tell them about the website. Wait, did he actually do that?
But you are rushing it. It lacks mystery. How do you expect to properly prepare them for the After Dark playlist if you sound like you're selling them aluminum siding or trying to convince them to attend Rock and Glow bowling at the Bowlerama?
You don't need to prepare them for anything, Peter. It's just the nighttime rotation.
It is unbridled mayhem, Lloyd. It is the audio equivalent of a fever dream. You cannot just tell them about the After Dark rotation. You have to make them feel the danger.
You just want mic time, don't you?
I am simply trying to justify my paycheck before the interns burn this building to the ground.
All right, fine. The floor is yours. Just make sure you actually read and hit the URL this time. This is probably dxradio.com.
Don't get me started on that proverbial mouthful of a URL. Did they make you pay by the letter for that one? DX Radio, custom DX-themed music for the discerning listener during the day. An absolute, unapologetic Hunter S. Thompson novel after the sun goes down. Experience the mayhem. Tune in now at thisisprobablydxradio.com. And now, back to the North Shore Studios for more of the From the Static podcast from DX Central and your host, Lloyd Van Horn.
We are here in the North Shore Studios, Studio A, this evening, recording this edition of episode 32 of the podcast. We're on our third segment here, and now we've talked about historical context. Let's dive into 2026, June of 2026, and see what was behind this year's absolute explosion of activity. So we're going to talk about the actual data, and then we're going to kind of put our thinking hats on and see if we can determine what's behind it, because it doesn't just come out of nowhere. What's different about this year than 2024? What's different than 2022? Right? So we're going to put our thinking caps on and think about that. All right. June of 2026. Historic, remarkable season. And let me actually get you the actual 21,000. Now, this is the preliminary. Remember, all of these are preliminary numbers I'm about to talk about here for the current year, because people are still adding logs, myself included. Okay? So these numbers are still going up. In fact, these numbers have changed since I did my summary at the top of the podcast. These numbers have changed since then because I've been adding more stuff. Okay? 21,599 total submitted logs for the month of June of 2026. 21,599. Remember, our previous best was 9,859 logs in 2025. We more than doubled our best ever in 1 month, right? In 1 year, we more than doubled our best ever. Let me back up and do that again. So we more than doubled last year, which was our best year. We more than doubled that this year. Less than a year later, or basically a year later, we doubled our best ever. There's never been anything like that in the data. I mean, we doubled our count from 2024 to 2025, but 2024 was terrible. To go and break the record in 2025 and then double that and with a whole new record in 26, unprecedented. Nothing like that in our data, even we're close. Let's dive into some of the numbers, though, and see what's behind that 21,000. So let's start with June 1st. Now, back up your memory a little bit. When we recorded the podcast last episode, it was June 5th, right? So we were looking at the end of May, the first 5 days of June. And this is what we've been looking at. We saw that May of 2026 ended with 210 logs on the 31st. After a period where we saw absolutely nothing happening the 27th, 28th, or 29th of May. Nothing happened. And I mean that literally. No e-skip on FM, North America, or Europe. Europe, I think they might have had like 200 logs a day of those days, maybe, which for them is basically nothing because they're used to getting 8,000 to 20,000 logs a day on an average summer day. For them, getting 200 logs is nothing. For us, that's a decent day. For them, that's nothing. 6 meters, nothing. Everything shut down the 27th, 28th, and 29th of May. Then the 30th, we had 26 logs, and then the 31st, 210. So we're on this ramp up. Then we get to June 1st, 134 logs. Now it's coming back down a little bit. So I've talked about the ramp up, ramp down, right? So now I'm thinking, was 210 really our peak of this little series that we're in right now? And then we got to June 2nd, 842 logs. Okay, now we're all right. Now we're doing better. 842 logs. June 3rd, 1,190 logs. So we're on this ramp up. Clearly, we're on a ramp up now. So now, in the first 3 days of the month, we have over 100 log day and 2 over 500s, with one of those over 1,100 logs. And that's in the first 3 days. Then we get to June 4th, 742. There's another one of those over 500. June 5th, 399. Now, that's over 100, but it's less than 500, but it's still a pretty good number. That's still one of those, it's under 500, so it's not one of the snacks we talked about earlier, but that's going to clog up that map sufficiently enough that people are going to feel like, hey, I got something out of this. All right? June 6th, 1,121 logs. Now, you could take these first 6 days of the month, 4,428 logs. Those first 6 days of the month, almost more than we had all of 2024, and it's roughly half of what we saw in 2025. In the first 6 days of the month, this is where I'm thinking to myself, we're heading for something big here. You don't see this kind of output and then it just shuts down. Very rarely would that happen. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't, but very rarely. June 7th, 55 logs. I shot myself in the foot when I said it. I had to go out and say we were heading for something historic, and then it just falls apart. Oh, Lloyd. Oh, Lloyd of the past. Don't worry, because here we go. You ready for this? We have never had 3 days that produced more activity than what we're about to look at right now. One of those days I had nothing. The first of these 3, which was the second highest, I had nothing. June 8th, nothing. It was all to my north. Nothing here. So this is one of those examples where if you look at me and I'm like, there were 2,854 logs on June 8th. Not here. So from my perspective, I'm like, June 8th wasn't a great day. But somebody got some action, clearly. 2,854 logs. Yeah, someone was getting some action. June 9th. Oh, that was 55 DXers on that one, by the way. And MUF up into NOAA Weather Radio. 162.475. Okay. June 9th, 2019. 57 DXers on this one. MUF around 107.9. So now if you do the math on this one now, okay, first 9 days of June, 9,356 logs submitted in the first 9 days. We've already beat all other years in 9 days. We have eviscerated all of the other years that came before, except for 2025. We're about 500 logs behind 2025, and it's only June 9th. Now do you see why I was like, guys, we're heading for something historic here? But again, just because we're having this explosion of activity here on the 8th, 9th, and what's about to be on the 10th, just we're having this explosion of activity, what are we getting in between? Because as we saw in 2025, you can't just rely on 4 days of explosive activity and then leave us with nothing in between. People are going to be like, about that month. June 10th, 5,784. That's as of today. Actually, if I go back in, it's actually now closer to 6,000. We're actually right around 6,000 now. I'll have all the final numbers coming out later, but right now it's right around 6,000. We've never had that. The highest we'd ever had was July 4th of last year. We were under 5,000. We've never had a day in North America, at least from 2017 on, that has produced more than 6,000 logs in a single day. Never. There it was. 72 DXers, 162.55 is our MUF. Top of the NOAA weather radio band, which means that sucker probably kept going. The MUF probably kept going beyond NOAA weather radio. Did he get to 220? Who knows? We're going to come back to June 10th. June 11th, 407, 30 DXers. June 12th, 122, 12 DXers. Okay, there's that ramp down, right? Okay, now clearly we're on the downswing. June 13th, 526, 28 DXers. Now, if I just do these first 13 days of the month, that's 16,000 logs. That's more than we've had in most seasons. That's just the first 13 days of June. That's more logs than we've had in just about any season on our data set. And we're talking about 2 weeks in June. If that helps put into perspective what we experienced those first 2 weeks of June. Now, it did slow down a little bit because that kind of activity is not sustainable. It can't keep producing at a high level when you have such a massive amount of ionization happening over a short period of time. Even if we take out those other 10 days of the first 13, if you take out the other 10, just those 3 days was 10,657 logs. In those 3 days, that's more than any month had ever seen before in our data set. On just those 3 days. That is an incredible amount of ionization. The 10th of June, we had 15 hours of E-skip. Consecutive 15 hours of E-skip. Non-stop. Somebody somewhere was reporting E-skip on June 10th for 15 consecutive hours. That's an incredible amount of ionization. And we were seeing incredibly stable paths. Now, there was some of your traditional movement you would normally see on a cloud, but overall, the paths were there and they were locked in. I was getting Minnesota and Iowa from, 6, 7 o'clock up until 10. And they were just locked in like locals. So you can't have that kind of activity continuously and not expect to see a dip. And we got the dip. June 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th. The total number of logs in those 6 days was 374 logs in those 6 days. People were ready to write the season off. People were ready to say, it's done. It came in. It had a big explosion of activity. I'm not going to complain about it because I've got hours and hours and hours of recording I have to go through, but it's done. We're done here. 2026 is a wrap. I actually had people on social media that I saw saying that the 2026 season was done. That it came in, it gave us a bunch of activity, and then it went away. June 20th, 328 logs. We're still under that 500 log barrier, but we're over 100. Okay. June 21st, 1,411 logs. 51 DXers. We have another explosion of activity. And then a bit of a downswing. 22nd through the 26th, 101 logs, 68 logs, 26 logs, 203 logs, and 6 logs. Now, this is the time of the month when you expect to be seeing a lot of more consistent high-level activity. It's really peaking right around here, and we were seeing a bit of a downswing. The peak happened early in the month, the 2nd through the 13th. That was the peak. Early the 1st through the 13th was the peak. Okay. We had 1,411 logs on the 21st. Then we get to the 22nd. 101, 68 on the 22nd, 26 on the 24th, 203 on the 25th, 6 on the 26th. Now, in that span, we had 2 days over 100, nothing over 500. So we had some of those like little things, but no snacks. We had the one meal on the 23rd, or 21st rather. But basically, from the 14th through the 26th, we had one meal, no snacks. That's what I was talking about when I talk about people who were like, about a season. That's the stuff that will make people think, on a season. And that's why, over the span of those 13 days, only one of those days produced any real measurable large-scale activity. So 12 of the 13 days were kind of no snacks. People were kind of down on the month of June towards the latter half. That's why. But June wasn't done. June was not finished by any stretch of the imagination. June 27th, 947 logs, 37 DXers involved. June 28th, 512 logs, 30 DXers. There's a snack. 288 on the 29th, 254 on the 30th to round out the month. For that grand total of 21,599 and counting. We're still counting, right? These are all these are preliminary numbers. So every one of these numbers, by the time we get down to the final count, are going to be way low compared to what everything else is. So what's the tallies here? So 30 active days in the month of June. Every single day saw activity. Does that meet our checklist? Yes, check. So we had the active days marker, check. Days of 100 logs or more, 21. 21 days of 100 logs or more. We've never had that many before in a month. Ever. 11 of those were over 500 logs. We've never had that many ever. 6 of those were over 1,000. We've never had that many ever. 3 of those were over 2,000. We've never had more than one of those in a month, ever. We had 3 in June. The average number of logs per day was 690 logs per day. 117 unique DXers submitted logs in the month of June of 2026. 117. Now, if you're curious, I said earlier the 119, that was for the entire season. What was our what's our usual totals for the month of June for a number of unique DXers? 2025, we had 92. 2023, we had 90. Those were our 2 highest years. So we had more DXers this year than we've ever had. But again, you can't report it if it ain't there. So it had to be there for you to report it. Okay? We had 2 days in the month where the MUF broke into and possibly exceeded the NOAA weather radio band. 162 megahertz. That's crazy. That's crazy. June of 2026 will go down as the most historic season in modern times. One of the most historic seasons in modern times. Now, there are some of those kind of like headline grabbing events that we see in some of the years past where like so-and-so got the first transatlantic reception. Well, that's been done now. So you're not going to hear about that as much. Well, so-and-so had the first one from the United States to Europe. Well, that's been done now. So you're not going to hear about that as much. Now, we are going to talk about distance distribution here in a bit. Because one of the things that some people will kind of use as a gauge of season quality is how good is it at producing long haul and double hop skip. We're going to look at that here in a bit. Our longest reception in June of 2026 was 2,654 miles. Most of that, like 2,000 plus distance stuff, is our friend Larry Horlick up in Newfoundland, or Randy out in Nevada. Those two are usually the ones who are going to be producing that, more than likely, the 2,000 plus. Extending our look here into the first little bit of July. Now, I mentioned earlier, it's July 8th as I'm recording this. We just had a massive opening here on the 8th. 1,857 logs and counting. That number's up from earlier. Before this, we had a little bit of a period here, July 1st, 2nd, 3rd. And we had a little bit of a downswing, 48, 1, and 24 logs. But since then, listen to this. July 4th, 697. July 5th, 813. July 6th, 623. July 7th, 700. July 8th, 1857. Every single one of those days, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days, over 500 logs. There's your snacks. One of those over 1,800 logs. There's your meal. Right? So we had a bunch of snacks and meals at the beginning of June, and then it kind of got quiet. And now we've had a big bunch of snacks and a meal here in the middle of July, or first week of July or so. So I don't know what's going to happen the rest of the month. I have no idea. But it's shaping up to be pretty good. I don't know if we're just front loading these months. maybe we are. Maybe we're front loading the months right now. But that's a pretty good haul. I mean, you're talking in that span, 4,690 logs in those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. 5 days, 4,690 logs. I'll take it. It's not like what we had in June, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. I'll take it. Even if we take out those 3 days there, the 8th, 9th, and 10th, where we had, almost 10,700 logs, even if we take those out, we're still over 10, 11,000 logs for the month, which would still be the biggest month we've ever had. Even if I get rid of those 3 days, it's still the biggest month we've ever had. Okay? Just to be clear, it's not just because of those 3 days. They helped. They are what put it in the stratosphere. But even without those 3 days, it's still the biggest month we've ever had in our data set. But the number that's a little interesting to me is logs per DXer. When we let's look at June as a just by itself. What I gave you earlier was the overall season metrics. When I looked at the season quality index, where I showed, 200 logs per DXer in 2021, 195 in 2025. That was for the whole season. And right now, as a season, we're sitting about 233. So we're above any other season as far as logs per DXer for the season. But let's look at June, specifically just June. The highest log per DXer we had ever had in the month of June actually was 2018. 169 logs per DXer in June of 2018. That was our highest June. We're at 177 this year. So this is our biggest June ever. Our biggest June ever from a logs per DXer standpoint, from an overall log standpoint, number of DXers standpoint, MUF standpoint, every single metric that we look at, the breakdown of active days and the productivity of those active days, logs per day, every single metric that you can look at, June of 2026 blows it all out of the water. Period. Okay? Now let's look at one more statistic here to kind of help fulfill the rest of the story for us. And that is distance distribution. Now, I keep track of distance distribution. I have set categories, and here's how those are defined. Short haul E-skip. That is between 300 and 700 miles from the DXer. Now, short haul E-skip on average is about 5%, 5.5% or so on average of our logs in our data set. It's about 5.6%. That's what it is. That's across all that 2017 to 2025 span. Next, we have what I call medium haul. This is about 701 to 1,200 miles. This makes up about 72% of all the logs that have been submitted in our data set from 2017 to 2025. This is your run-of-the-mill stuff, right? 700 to 1,200 miles. This is what, when you get E-skip, this is what you think about. Long haul, 1,201 to 1,600 miles. This takes us right up there at the theoretical edge of a single hop. Okay? There is some debate about, anything over 1,500 being double hop. I'm just going to round that up a little bit and encapsulate anything 1,600 miles or less is probably single hop. I mean, you may have some double hop at 1,550 or 1,575. It may be some super short double hop. It very well could be. Okay. But probably not. Probably not. It's probably long single hop more than likely. That's about 21% of all the logs submitted. So it's our second highest category. And I started at 1,201. I've had some people who were like, you should probably bump that up a little bit. I started at 1,201 because when I looked at the data, around 1,200 miles is where I kind of saw a break point. I tried to line these distance distributions up by break points. Where did I see kind of a shift in the percentages? And it was right around 700 miles, right around 1,200 miles, and then this 1,600 miles. Okay. Those were kind of like the break points. So 1,200 miles is where I started to see a bit of a drop. Some people were like, I wouldn't consider 1,200 miles long haul. Well, the data says otherwise. The data says there was a pretty significant drop in between what we saw with medium haul at that 700 to 1,200, and after 1,200, it dropped off pretty significantly. And that's where we get down to this 21% for long haul E's at 1,200 to 1,600 miles. Okay, I'm just trying to keep everything kind of consistent here. Possible double hop, 1,600, because there may even be some single hop in that 1,600. So I'm going to call it possible double hop for anything more than 1,600 miles. That's about 1.3% of everything. Okay? So keep those numbers in mind. 72% for the medium haul, 21% for the long haul, 5.6% for short haul, and 1.3% for double hop. And the double hop is there. It's weak and it's long. You're getting multiple clouds aligned, and it's largely driven by Larry and Randy. If those two guys are having a down year, that number is going to drop considerably because they're the predominant callers or receivers of double hop E-skip. Okay, that's just how it is. All the rest of us make up a less than 1% of the double hop. They're about 1% of the double hop is those two guys. Everybody else is about the 0.3, 0.4. That's how that breaks down. All right. Short haul, high MUF. If you see a high MUF, that means it's taking the distant stuff with it as it climbs the frequencies. As it's climbing in frequency, it's taking longer distance stuff with it. The stuff lower underneath it is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So a higher percentage of short haul tells me we are having higher MUFs than we would normally see. And when I look at some of these seasons, like 2025, we had some higher MUFs, 7% short haul. 2024, we had much lower MUFs, 3%, right? So it went down, right? So 2026, distance distribution, considering what we just talked about, just for the month of June, I'm just looking at June right here. Starting with short haul, 9%. 9%. It's not quite double what the normal would be, but it's higher. It's a much higher percentage than what we normally see. 9%. 9% of our logs in June were between 300 and 700 miles. That tells me there was high MUF, and guess what? There was. There were 2 days in June that had no weather radio E-skip. reported. That tells me we're probably looking at some pretty good stuff here, right? Medium haul, 700 to 1,200 miles, 74%. So a little bit more, a little bit higher on a lot higher on the short haul, and a little bit higher on the medium. Okay. Probably on the low end of that too, if I'd have to guess, especially because long haul E, 1,201 to 1,600 mile, 17%. That's down from the 21% we normally see. Right? So long haul skip is down. So those longer 1,600 mile catches, we have fewer of those this year. And possible double hop, and this is again just June, 0.53. 0.53. Almost a full point down. Like I mentioned, Randy and Larry haven't had as much of a big season this year as they normally do. That's driving that double hop number down. Now, does that mean that the double hop is really down? Or is it just down for those two and other folks are getting some? Good question. Good question. We're going to have to bear that out. When we do our kind of season finale, I'll try to dive into that double hop number and see how much this year was Randy and Larry compared to previous years. That'll tell me a lot, all right? So, 9%, 74%, 17%, 0.53% compared to 5.6, 72, 21, and 1.3. So we're getting more of the short stuff that we don't normally see because we're getting these high MUFs. We're getting less of the long stuff. All right? Remember what I said at the beginning of this, I guess the last segment? In 2024, I had more paths out west. I had a fewer log count, but I had more stuff out west. Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado. Those are a little bit further distances for me. I haven't had those the last couple of years because I've been getting more of the East Coast paths where I have higher numbers of logs, shorter DX as well, but fewer of those West Coast longer paths, or the western half of the U.S. longer paths. There may be something to be said for that. That when you have these paths, at least for the eastern U.S. DX, when you have these paths that are heavily centered on the eastern U.S., you're going to get more logs, you're going to get some short logs, you're going to get some high MUF, they're going to be super strong, but you're not going to get as many paths on a long distance. Now, some of the East Coast DXers do get out into Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, places like that. That for me, I don't get those because when they're getting those, I'm getting Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, right? Another thing that I've noticed this year, there have been some southern paths, but there have been fewer southern paths than in years past. I haven't had a single opening to Mexico yet this season, not one. And I'm good for at least 2 or 3 usually, with 1 or 2 of those being in July. So maybe we might still be getting one of those here soon. You know, usually there's a Mexican opening somewhere in the middle and end of the month, or 1 or 2 of those. I haven't had any this year at all, though. Not one. I had one opening that brought me down to Guatemala and El Salvador, and that's it. I'm thankful for those because those were 2 new countries for me. But that's the only opening that I've had to my south. There's been some others that have had some nice southern openings. Our friend Barry up in Tennessee got to Nicaragua. And there have been folks who have gotten Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, Cuba, Cayman, places like that. But I haven't seen a lot of them. And for me, that means there's not a lot of activity in the Gulf of Mexico. Because in order for me to have down south of me, that means I have to have a cloud in the Gulf of Mexico. So the Gulf of Mexico paths have been attenuated. There's been a lot more stuff up north. The June 8th day that I mentioned that I didn't get anything, there were almost 3,000 logs. They were all up north. A lot of east-west from like New England to Minnesota, right? Ohio up into Minnesota and Manitoba. places like that, like all very centralized up north. And there have been a lot of those openings. And there's also been quite a few openings up in the Pacific Northwest and out west that were isolated out there as well, which has been nice to see because they need that. They need to have some openings out there because they don't get a ton. So 2026 has been interesting so far. But we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to put our thinking caps on. We're going to look ahead at the rest of July from a historical perspective and kind of see what we see. And see how that's comparing to what we've seen so far in the month of July. And put our thinking caps on and think, what's kind of happening here? Is this normal? Why are we seeing this explosion of activity that we don't normally see in other years? Or haven't seen in other years? So, don't go anywhere, my friends. More of the From the Static podcast is heading your way.
From the Static is made possible by listeners just like you. If you love tracking the bands and sharing the thrill of the chase, consider joining the crew in Studio C on Patreon. Your support is what keeps the dial spinning and the content coming. As a thank you, our patrons get exclusive perks, including early access to every single podcast episode, a full week of early access to all DX Central YouTube videos, exclusive patron-only live streams, and the first look at upcoming challenges and contests. Help us keep the Static alive. Become a member today at patreon.com/DX Central. That's patreon.com/DX Central.
Ever wonder what the bands sound like down on the Gulf Coast? You don't have to wonder anymore. Head over to livedxing.com and spin the dials right from our North Shore studios. For AM, shortwave and ham radio enthusiasts, we have a dedicated lineup of Kiwi SDRs ready to pull in weak signals. If you're an FM DXer, dive into our suite of 5 high-performance FM web servers, each paired with a top-tier antenna built specifically to catch legendary Gulf Tropo openings, and hopefully some sporadic E. Plus, our VHF and tracking setups let you monitor local air traffic from MSY, pull in NOAA weather radio, and decode live APRS, ADSB, and marine AIS data right on the map. If you want to explore further, we've got links to global receiver directories to take your DXing worldwide. Experience the airwaves from our neck of the woods. For the DXer or radio enthusiast who wants to hear it all, visit livedxing.com today.
The summer heat is officially here, and that means the dials are catching fire. The 3rd annual DX Central Summer of DX Challenge is underway right now. This year, we've turned up the temperature. For the first time ever, we've added NOAA weather radio to the lineup. Get ready to hunt down those elusive, low-power weather radio stations via Tropo, Meteor Scatter, or major sporadic E openings. We've completely overhauled the medium wave and FM interfaces with a brand new log entry process featuring full bulk import options to save you time. And the hunt goes deeper than ever. Alongside our classic grid square chase, we've added a brand new county chase and targeted bounty hunts to push your gear to the limit. Are you ready to claim your spot on the leaderboard? Head to summerofdx.com and log your catches today.
Summer of DX.
47.
The on-air light is back on in Studio A. That means it's time for our final segment of the From the Static podcast from DX Central with your host, Lloyd Van Horn.
It's the DX Central From the Static podcast. We're talking Sporadic E. And this is our final segment of the show here. We are talking about... Okay, so we had a big month in June. Why? What gives? There's some different theories we can kind of talk about. And then from what we've seen here so far in July, is there any historical precedents that might tell us what to expect for the rest of July? Are we going to see any more big events? Is it going to kind of peter out? What's going to happen here in the rest of the month? And maybe even August. Because last year, August was a really good month. We had more in August than we did in May last year. And that never happens. So, all right. first, let's talk about kind of our thoughts about what might be happening here. So there's a couple of theories that I kind of want to pose to you. So with a lot of the current thinking and the current logic on sporadic E is that it's the ionization is occurring of kind of metallic meteor dust. There you have this metallic meteor dust at the E layer, and it becomes ionized through solar radiation, through wind shear and winds that are occurring at the upper layers of the stratosphere into the mesosphere and the thermosphere and places like that. And some of those might, be in the stratosphere and then bump up into the thermosphere. And those are, by the way, the thermosphere and the mesosphere, you actually have a higher temperature there than you do below it, right? The conventional thinking is the higher you go, the colder it gets. Well, that is the case until you get up a certain height, and then it starts getting really, 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 really hot. Like really, really hot. And when things get hot, they get energetic and they get agitated and they become like, this movement's happening, right? And so when you get that movement and you already have some solar radiation in there, these high temperatures, ionization is occurring. So all this kind of mixes together, and that's how we get these E layers. So it starts with metallic meteor dust. Well, one of the things that has been happening this year is scientists are postulating that we are actually entering a more dense area of our solar system for meteor dust, which is why we're seeing more fireballs, boloids, these bigger meteors, right? I just saw one on Twitter a few minutes ago before I was getting ready to do the show. I saw a big green meteor, and they were like, here comes the Perseids, right? Because we're right around the corner for the Perseids. So, that'll be interesting this year to see how that goes. But we're entering just a more densely packed area of meteor dust, larger meteor fragments, and things like that. So if that is the case, then that means there's more material there to be ionized. The other side of this as well, and I've heard this mentioned before, and it was kind of there in Pat Dyer's data as well. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio, so it's not automatic. But there is some credence that the data kind of lends to this theory that on the downward side of a solar maximum, there's an increase in sporadic E activity. Again, it's not 1-to-1, it's not consistent, it's not every time, but there is some credence to this in the data. And if we kind of think about that, when was our solar maximum? We had a double peak for solar cycle 25. One of those was in 2024. The other was 2025. Well, 2024 was a terrible year. And normally the peak is when we see kind of, if this theory holds out, the theory would be that the peak is when you have like a little bit of a down period in E, and then on the way down, you start seeing a ramp up in activity. And then you get down to the solar minimum and things are kind of a little quieter, and then during these kind of periods of ramp up, ramp down is when you see the most activity. That's what the theory is. And again, there is some support of that in the data. Again, it's not 1-to-1, but there is some support of that in the data. Well, if that's the case, if we are in this period of heightened activity because of some of the solar stuff that we're seeing, and Sol has been very active in 2026 and 2025, but it almost needs to be a certain kind of active. Remember 2024? It was very active in 2024, but it almost like it stopped everything from happening. Last year it was active, but it felt different. This year it's felt different. We're getting more like, I don't know, different kinds of solar radiation or something. I don't know. I'm just postulating here. But the kinds of solar events that we're getting, maybe it's the magnetic poles, like what direction, right? Because we get like these BZ positive, BZ negative, right? That tells you if the aurora is going to be more southern facing or more northern facing. I don't know. Maybe it's something to do with the polarity of what we're getting from the sun or something. Who knows? But on this downward swing of the solar maximum, you see an increased activity. We're seeing that now. That is pairing out. And to the point where this year, combined with supposedly now in a denser cloud of material for the ionization to, or the solar activity to ionize, it's exploding with activity. So maybe that's what's going on here. Maybe. Now, my usual disclaimer is going to stand here. What I just said is a guess. Now, it comes from an educated standpoint because of some of the things that I've read, some of the studies that I've read, and the research that's been done, and the leading theories about how E occurs. So it's an educated guess, probably, but it's still just a guess. I don't have any hard data or scientific measurements to tell me that we have more material, particulate up in that layer of the ionosphere to be ionized. I don't have any data that tells me any difference on the solar activity on this downward swing than on the peak or right before it. I have nothing to kind of show for that. I have logging data. That's all I have. And the logging data tells me something is happening this year that is unlike anything we've seen in recent years. So it leads credence to me that perhaps the increased meteor dust and the downward swing of a solar maximum sounds legit to me. We're certainly seeing something happening. So whatever's causing it, whatever's the actual reason for it, who knows? Whatever it is, I'm glad it's here. And it's bringing out some really, really good activity. I'd like to see some more stuff to the south. I'm over here in our historic season. I'm being greedy and saying I'd like to see some more to the south and I'd like to see some more stuff out west from here. And more stuff for our western DXers to get stuff as well. But we have had a lot of fun. I've got hours and hours and hours of recordings to review. A whole lot of Michigan and Minnesota and Pennsylvania and Ontario and New York. A whole lot of stations in those areas. I actually have, if I remember like on my logbook, I think I have more stations in Pennsylvania and New York than I do Mississippi. And I'm right here in Louisiana. So that tells you anything. More than Florida. And I mean, we get that Tropo engine all the time. So it's been a really, really interesting year so far. What does the rest of the month hold? What does the rest of July hold? Well, I'll tell you, there is no precedent here. The closest that I could find for a precedent would have been two things. One, 2022, July started out pretty strong, and it was pretty consistent for the most of the month until we got to the latter part of the month, and then, as it tends to do, it started to slow down quite a bit. But the first, we'll call it 19 days of 2022, you had an average of between 100 and 500 logs every day, just about. Every day. Right? So it was pretty consistent there in 2022, which is another reason why I think people look fondly on that year, because you had consistently a lot of these like 200 to 500 log days just about every day for the first 19 days of the month. That's going to make everybody feel pretty good. The other correlation that I could find was 2021. And that's that season where we had between the 8th and the 14th, we had 1,300, 500, 400, 900, 83, 1,700, and 1,500 logs in the span of about a week. And everyone to this day talks about how great 2021 July was. Well, there's a reason why. And that's kind of what we had there to an extent in June, right? We had a much more amplified version of that first 2 weeks of June. And it lasted for 13 days. That's the other thing about it. That was a long stretch. But July, we've had those, who knows what's going to happen the rest of the month. But we did have those first 5 days here. Well, 134, 842, 1190, 742, and 399. Who knows what's going to happen? I'm sorry, that was June. I'm looking at the wrong month. My bad. 48, 1, 24, and then 697, 813, 623, 700, and 1857. That was the 8th here today. So big stretch there of 500 or more for a couple days in there. So that's pretty decent. Who knows what the rest of the month will hold, if we're going to continue to see high activity or not. But it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good start. I will say that after you get past the 15th, 19th, somewhere in there, adjust your expectations accordingly. Okay? The 15th through the 19th, that's about the end of the majority of like those really big openings, like a consistent basis. That's not to say we won't see any, because there are plenty of years where we had after the 19th. I'm looking at 2022 here. Is that 2022? That's 2021. 2021. The 22nd we had 220, and then we had 679, 416, 40, 55, 1, 0, 28, 4, and 262 on the last day of the month. So we had a nice little stretch there between the 22nd or so and the 24th. So about 3 days in there where we had a nice little burst. There was 2023 where we had a burst on the 29th of 460 or 482, 760, and then 9. Last year, we had one there the last day of the month, 407. We had a nice burst here on the 21st at 1462. But July last year wasn't really all that great. There wasn't a lot of consistency. We only had a total of 1 day over 500 logs for the entire month, 9 days over 100 logs in the month of July last year. So it wasn't super great. The best one was 21 and 22. We had 17 days over 100 logs in 21, with 7 of those breaking over 500. We had 18 days in 2022 over 100, with 3 of those breaking over 500. So again, when I say the 7 over 500, that's where people, 2021 was a fantastic year in July. The rest of the year is not so much. People haven't really enjoyed July as much the last couple of years because it's been fewer of those kind of snack openings, those 500 to 1,000 intermediate openings. So who knows what the rest of the month is going to have. We've already had quite a few snacks here in the first 8 days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days of snacks in the first 8 days. I'll take it. Like to see some more of that spread out, but I would definitely consider, once we get to about the 19th or so, start adjusting your expectations. You might see some big openings here and there. And when I say big, I mean over 500 logs. We might get one over 1,000 maybe, but it's going to dwindle down. August is a wild card. I don't know what to expect for August at all. Last year was a big month. This year we have the Perseids coming up, and if we are in an increased area of meteor dust and we're on the downward swing, we could have another really good August. We may have nothing. I don't know what to expect, so we're going to have to wait and see how July pans out and then get into August and see how that goes. So, there you go. Hopefully this information has been informative and helpful for you to kind of put some of the numbers into perspective for us for this year. So, we'll be back next month with another edition of the From the Static podcast where we dive into the data from July, looking ahead to August, and really kind of putting a kind of a not a full tied bow on the season because it won't be over yet, but a nice kind of perspective on the season and kind of some of our preliminary assessments of how the year went. So from all of us here at DX Central, my friends, best of DX. Good luck on the rest of this Sporadic E season. We'll see you next time right here on the DX Central From the Static podcast.
You have been listening to From the Static, a podcast production of DX Central.
DX Central is your premier destination devoted to all things AM and FM DX.
Expand your DXing experience by subscribing to our YouTube channel at the handle @DX Central for comprehensive how-to videos, DX air checks, and much more.
And join the community every Friday night from September through May for our weekly live streams. You can find us at dxcentrallive.com.
Ready to test your skills? Head over to dxchallenges.com to participate in our regular contests and challenges built specifically for AM and FM DXers around the world.
Or, if you would like to experience the bands from the Gulf Coast, visit livedxing.com. We provide an assortment of online receivers that allow you to spin the dials exactly as if you are sitting right here in Mandeville at North Shore Studios.
Need a soundtrack for your next DXing session? Check out DX Radio at thisisprobablydxradio.com, featuring custom DX-themed music aimed squarely at the DXing community.
If your brand or business is interested in reaching a dedicated community of radio enthusiasts, sponsorship opportunities are available. Please reach out to us via email at sponsors@dxcentral.net.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DX Central.
This podcast is a production of DX Central and is copyright 2026 by Lloyd Van Horn. All rights reserved. Any unauthorized rebroadcast, reproduction, or use of this audio without express written consent is strictly prohibited.
Thank you for listening. Keep the dial spinning 73 and best of DX.